All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to a presentation on CMMC by ISSE Services. I am your presenter, Jeff Snyder, and a little about myself. My career started as an IT in the Coast Guard. During my 10 years active duty, I honed the skill of balancing cybersecurity and being able to do the mission. After the Coast Guard, I joined ISSE Services in 2022, and I have been helping companies implement CMMC security requirements. For certifications, I am a CMMC certified professional. I have CISM, CCSP, CISSP with the architect concentration. And for formal education, I have a master's in cybersecurity and information assurance. And a little about ISSE Services. We are a woman-owned small business and have been supporting the DoD for over 20 years. We have a strong presence in northern Utah. We are a registered practitioner organization, which means we can offer CMMC consulting services to help companies get ready for an assessment. We also offer managed security services. And earlier this year, we went through the third-party assessment process for CMMC Level 2 and received a perfect score of 110 out of 110. Here's an overview of the topics I will be presenting. Starting off with what is CMMC 2.0. I want to make sure all of us are on the same page about what it is and what its requirements are. Then I will talk about the process of becoming CMMC compliant. If you have questions, you can type them in the YouTube chat and I will address them at the end. And please feel free to ask me anything about CMMC. The presentation will run about 25 minutes, and our why in giving this webinar is to help business leaders make informed decisions on developing a path to becoming CMMC compliant. Right now, there is a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt in the community, and we want to speak in plain terms and show you that it can be done. So starting off, what is CMMC 2.0? CMMC version 2.0 was released in November 2021. CMMC applies to DoD prime contractors and their subcontractors that process, store, or transmit FCI or CUI, and you'll hear that phrase, process, store, or transmit frequently. CMMC's purpose is to implement cybersecurity controls within the defense industrial base. The levels are decided by the classification of the information your organization deals with. So level 1, 2, or 3. And November 10th is when CMMC phase 1 will begin, meaning all new contracts could include CMMC language. Now onto the meat of the presentation. How does my organization get started down the path of CMMC? So here is a timeline for the various steps of a level 2 journey. The 7 to 8 month timeline is assuming you are starting from scratch. You are allocating one person or 40 hours a week to this endeavor. It is conservative to allow for revising documentation and the long lead time for scheduling an assessment with a C3PAO, which stands for Certified Third Party Assessor Organization. Meaning, is it possible to do it faster? Yes, it is. If you all have already started, you do not need to make any technical changes or buy new equipment that would hold up the process, and you have the experience to answer the security objectives correctly the first time, and if you allocate more than one person to this. So I want to iterate the level of effort to document security requirements should not be underestimated. All right, on to step 1. Step 1 is to identify your CMMC level. You need to know what target you are trying to hit. So 48 CFR, which stands for Code of Federal Regulations, states that new contracts that have CMMC requirements will contain the level and the assessment type that is needed prior to contract award. So level 1 is federal contract information, which is information that is not approved for public release. There are 17 security requirements, and you can self-attest. Level 2 is controlled unclassified information. There are 110 requirements, and it is possible to self-attest, but most likely will require a C3PAO to assess your company. And level 3 is the most sensitive type of CUI and adds more security requirements, and the assessment is done by the federal government. The security requirements are outlined in NIST's special publication 800-171, and for level 3, 800-172. All right, there's a lot of information to explain on this slide, so bear with me. Step 2, once you know the value of the information the government is sending you, the next step is to identify the assets that process, store, or transmit that data. The assets will typically be captured in a document such as an asset inventory spreadsheet. There are 5 asset types. First, we have CUI assets. These are assets that process, store, or transmit CUI. These include printers, laptops, and desktops, phones or mobile devices, backup solutions, USB drives, CDs, and even physical documents. This category, you can see, covers both digital and physical mediums, and CUI assets are always within the scope for an assessment. The next asset type is security protection assets. These are assets that provide security functions or capabilities to the organization. Examples are key card badge systems, physical security devices and keys, SIM solutions, Windows Defender or other antivirus tools, firewalls, routers, and intrusion prevention or detection systems. They are always within the CMMC assessment scope, even if they don't directly process, store, or transmit CUI. And that means they will be evaluated against all 110 security requirements. The third asset type is the contractor risk managed asset, or CRM. These assets could technically process, store, or transmit CUI, but are not intended to due to security policies, procedures, or practices. Examples include docking stations, monitors, televisions, microphones, or computers in departments, say like HR or an executive assistant that never touches CUI. CRMs are not assessed against all 110 security requirements, but the documentation showing how they are sufficiently protected will be carefully reviewed. And again, they do not need to be physically or logically separated from CUI assets. The fourth asset type is specialized assets. Examples of this include IoT devices, government property provided to you, CNC machines, and other manufacturing equipment. These assets may or may not process, store, or transmit CUI, and they are not assessed against all 110 security requirements, but they must still be documented in the system security plan and the asset inventory spreadsheet. And finally, we have out-of-scope assets. These are devices that never process, store, or transmit CUI at any time and never will. They are either physically or logically separated from CUI assets. And according to the Level 2 Scoping Guide, there are no documentation requirements, but it does say to be prepared to justify the inability of an out-of-scope asset to process, store, or transmit CUI. After identifying all your assets, step 3 is to choose a technical design. The all-in approach is bringing everything in your organization into the CMMC assessment scope, and an enclave is typically recommended if 20% or less of your organization needs to access CUI or FCI data, and an enclave includes building out a specific part of your environment to comply with the CMMC requirements. Here is an example of a network diagram of the all-in approach. You can see all devices are within the same boundary. And here is an example of an enclave. You can see the organization sections off a part of their infrastructure for the FCI CUI environment. Step 4, once you have picked a technical design, the next step is to start configuring your environment to satisfy the CMMC security requirements. Keep in mind, you will need to prove all your devices satisfy all applicable 800-171A security requirements. And I have an example of what a -171A security requirement is. So here's an example of a CMMC security requirement. This is found in 800-171A. This is requirement 3.14.6, which says we need to monitor our systems, including both inbound and outbound communications traffic, to detect attacks and indicators of potential compromise. So to meet this requirement, there are 3 assessment objectives that must all be satisfied. Objective A is about monitoring the overall system. This includes things like the cloud environments we use, firewalls, antivirus, access logs, and computer logs. And then objective B and C focus specifically on inbound and outbound communications traffic. That means monitoring logs from firewalls, intrusion and detection systems, host-based firewalls, cloud networking logs, etc. So for each of these objectives, it is not enough to say we have logs turned on. We need evidence that the logging is enabled, properly configured, and actually monitored. That evidence is often called an artifact, and that is what assessors will look for to verify compliance. And remember, this is just one security requirement. In total, there are 110 requirements. Excuse me. So there are 110 requirements that break down into 320 separate assessment objectives. Each objective needs to be addressed and evidenced just like this example. All right, so on to step 5, which is to prepare for the assessment by drafting documentation, policies, gathering evidence, then drafting even more documentation, and then you're going to be drafting even more documentation. And we are going to go through each of the steps on the slide to show how to start preparing for an assessment. And these are not necessarily in order. So here is an example of an asset inventory spreadsheet, and be sure to include out of scope assets. You're going to want to draft your SSP, and for level 2 and level 3, you have to have a system security plan. So this template is available at the URL on the bottom. Be sure to write the SSP at the security objective level and not at that higher security requirement level. So you're going to be writing an SSP to demonstrate compliance with the 320 assessment objectives. You're going to want to include a network diagram in your SSP. And you'll also want to include a data flow diagram. It is not recommended, but it is not required, but it is highly recommended. And this diagram helps assessors understand where your data is processed, stored, and transmitted throughout your organization. So you're going to also want to define the various responsibilities in the organization. For example, there is a security requirement to review the public website and make sure there isn't any CUI. Whose responsibility is that? Who does incident response? Who does sysadmin and network admin? Who reviews the SSP? All the roles and responsibilities will need to be defined in your SSP. Another thing you're going to want to include in your SSP is all of your FIPS certificates for the parts of your environment that are responsible for encryption, both data in transit and data at rest. It's important to understand that the encryption algorithm must be validated and not just approved. And you can verify this by checking the NIST Cryptographic Module Validation Program, which maintains the official list of validated modules. And as you can see in the screenshot, you can just Google it or Bing it. All right, so step 6 is working with an MSP or an RPO. Step 6 can be done at the same time as step 5, and this step is optional because your in-house IT or cybersecurity department may already be capable of documenting and implementing all 320 assessment objectives. An RPO or registered practitioner organization provides CMMC consulting. They can guide you on how to answer the controls, figure your environment, and prepare for the assessment. And MSP is a managed services provider, and they are essentially outsourcing of your IT department. They can also help you get across the finish line. A common strategy that saves both time and money is to let your in-house administrators take the first pass at the CMMC security objectives, and then bring in an RPO to do a gap analysis, check your work, and fill in anything that may be missing. So the question becomes, how do you find an RPO? And you can do that by going to the Cyber AB marketplace and filter for RPOs. Here's a screenshot of our company's listing on the Cyber AB marketplace. If you have an MSP supporting your organization, you will need to work with them to create and document a shared responsibility matrix. This matrix outlines which security objectives are handled by your organization and which are handled by the MSP. Here is an example of Microsoft Azure's shared responsibility matrix. It's important to understand that an MSP does not receive a CMMC certification because your organization passes its assessment. They are also responsible for providing documentation and evidence for the security objectives that they manage on your behalf. So here's a great slide to screenshot of questions to ask your MSP. Do they have a shared responsibility matrix that is in line with 800-171A? Do they have or are they pursuing CMMC Level 2 certification? Are they able to support you through a CMMC Level 2 assessment? So your RPO or MSP can sit in the assessment with you and help answer questions on your behalf. Do they have any DoD or defense industrial base customers? Have they assessed their own tools or providers for compliance? And do they have only US persons that would be supporting your environment? So step 7, the final step is to complete an assessment. You can find a certified third-party assessor organization or C3PAO on the Cyber AB marketplace. To pass the assessment, you must score a 110 out of 110. There is a conditional certification if you score at least 88 out of 110. However, the requirements that you missed can only be certain 1-point requirements, and each security requirement is assigned a point value of 5, 3, or 1. And again, you're only allowed to fall short on the 1-point requirements. If you receive a conditional certification, you have 180 days to fix the deficiencies and schedule a reassessment, getting you to the perfect score of 110 out of 110. During an assessment, the C3PAO assessors will be on site to review certain security requirements. Most of those requirements revolve around physical security. And remember, your MSP or RPO can support you throughout the assessment process. So here's some questions to help you determine if you are ready for an assessment. And if the answer to all of these questions are yes, then you're ready for your assessment. So can you defend the scope you have presented? If you are using an MSP, are the roles clearly defined? Has your team been prepared for the assessment? So they're going to be asked interview questions, and are they ready to answer those? And are you sure that your POAMs are empty? So let's do a quick recap of the presentation. CMMC is a requirement for all businesses working with the Department of Defense that process, store, or transmit federal contract information or controlled unclassified information. Starting November 10th, the new government contracts may include CMMC language. On average, the timeline to become compliant is about 7 to 8 months when starting from scratch. If CMMC is keeping you up at night, please reach out to us. There is a clear path to certification, and it's not as painful as you might be imagining. And I wanted to provide a link to helpful resources. So this is another great slide to screenshot. And these are source documentation and can help you figure out what your CMMC requirements are and how to address them. All right, so that is the end of my presentation. My contact information is at the bottom of the screen. Again, please contact us if CMMC is stressing you out. And now I'm going to open it up to any questions in chat. All right, looks like there aren't any questions. We appreciate your time and good luck on your CMMC.